So Jonathan, the president was in Cincinnati last night. Of course, since the Red Sox have completely tanked and thrown in the entire season because Dombrowski didn't want to buy a reliever.
You too. Come on now.
They didn't buy. You know what? I could actually watch the rally, and I did. Very interesting. And I'll talk about what I saw. I think he's now moving into this sort of new, different sort of autocrat and waiting pose. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But what did you see there last night?
Well, after 2 nights of the political world focusing on the Democratic debates in Detroit, last night all eyes were trained on Cincinnati watching the president. This was his first rally since the one a few weeks ago where those send her back chants broke out about the Congressman Omar, the Somali-born congresswoman who, of course, moved to America as a child and is a U.S. citizen. And there was talk about whether those chants would happen again, whether the president would incite them, and if they did happen, whether he would stop them. As it turned out, early on in the first minutes of the rally, he made a mention of the 4 radicals, the left-wing congresswomen, who were clearly the 4 congresswomen of color that some have dubbed the squad. But that was it. He didn't mention them by name. There were no chants. However, what he did go on further was a long, long attack at urban cities, urban centers and cities of this country, particularly those run by Democrats. He didn't mention Elijah Cummings by name, but that was clearly the subtext here, and sort of painted those places
also, by the
un-American.
way, cities that were run by black leaders or predominantly black urban centers. It reminded me a lot of the whole, quote, S-hole country. So if you're a city that is predominantly black or run by a black leader, then he now is putting you in the same category that he puts countries in the Caribbean and in Africa that are run by black leaders.
And at one moment, when a protester was being moved out of the arena, he asked, sort of jokingly, whether or not the mayor of Cincinnati was a Democrat. So this was clearly sort of a new line of attack for him. This is where this is something that he feels like is a winning issue for him going into the election. There certainly were, I will say, lots of Republicans and White House staffers who were very nervous about the send her back chants. The president himself at the White House before leaving had indicated that he didn't really want his supporters to say it. But he, of course, as he always does, like, well, if the chant starts out, we'll see what happens. He's certainly loath to ever criticize his base.
It's the kind of tension that Trump loves, just going right to the edge. Let's take a look at what happened last night in Cincinnati.
It's been total one-party control of the inner cities. For 100 years, it's been one-party control. And look at them. We can name one after another, but I won't do that, because I don't want to be controversial. Look at Los Angeles with the tents and the horrible, horrible, disgusting conditions. Look at San Francisco. Look at some of your other cities. The homicide rate in Baltimore is significantly higher than El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. I believe it's higher than... Give me a place that you think is pretty bad. Give me a place. The guy says Afghanistan. I believe it's higher than Afghanistan. In our country, think of that.
You know, there were a lot of protests. Trump was sort of walking across the stage, sniffing, you know how he does, breathing it all in. Willie, he had this thing down that he's actually amping up his on-stage performances. He actually reminded me, you see the Austin Powers movies?
Oh, yeah.
Did you see the Austin Powers movie? Yeah. He sort of reminded me at times like a fat bastard. At times he was like looking at the audience. Remember the character? It's a character. Yeah. It's a character in Austin Powers. And he's sniffing and he's looking around. He's like, thank you. I thought he was going to say, get into my stomach at one point. He just is really starting to take on this role of dear leader. And you can see it last night more than usual. He's amping it up. He's amping his audiences up. He's amping up his racial attacks. He's amping up the demagoguery. This is a guy, he is, as David Brooks said this morning in the New York Times, this is a guy is a force. And the only way the Democrats are going to beat him is with an equal force.
Well, I mean, we've become so numb to the way Donald Trump behaves, and when you watch a rally like that, it's worth pausing to recognize that the president of all the United States and all these cities is trashing the cities over which he presides, whether it's Los Angeles or San Francisco or Baltimore. But he knows politically he is not going to win those places, so he's made a calculation that he can go after that to stoke up the people in that crowd, to stoke up the people who came out and voted for him last time. I think it's also worth mentioning, Yamiche, how far the bar has been lowered for Donald Trump when everyone was crossing their fingers and saying, let's see if he asks the public, the group in front of him, or encourages the group in front of him to chant, send them back, about United States citizens, about United States congresswomen. And when he doesn't do that, everyone says, oh, good, okay, at least he didn't do that. That's the president of the United States, and people are acting grateful that he didn't let the crowd chant, send them back.
Well, in some ways, this is, I think, what has made President Trump be able to survive scandals and controversies, because right when you think he's going to hit his lowest, President Trump pulls back just a little and says, you know what, I'm not going to go for the racist chant of send her back. Instead, what I'm going to do is make light for several minutes of the suffering of families and of American citizens all across this country in places like Baltimore and Chicago, which happen to have majority black cities and centers, but then not talk about the suffering that's going on in the state that he's in, which is Ohio. I just came back from Ohio. There's a place called Macery, Ohio. It's nicknamed Misery, Ohio, because people there are suffering so much between economic devastation and drug overdoses, and the president didn't say anything about that. And Abby Phillip of CNN had a really smart tweet, and she said, can you imagine the president going on an extended riff about the opioid crisis and overdoses in rural areas across this country? And you probably can't. And it's true, you probably can't imagine the president focusing on the counties that I visited, which are 95% white, 91% white in a lot of areas that went for him overwhelmingly in Ohio. He doesn't want to talk about the struggles that those places are facing because a lot of them are run by Republicans.
Yeah, and when he's walking around like that, Donnie Deutsch, if I'm a little kid, I'm worried. I'm just worried. Get in my stomach. It's an Austin Powers joke. We'll show you clips later. So, Donnie, Jonathan Lemire and the Associated Press wrote an article this past week about how Donald Trump keeps lowering the bar, that every time you think he has gone as low as he can possibly go, which is, of course, over 3 years, has been a great deal, that even the most cynical White House observers, before he started attacking Elijah and started attacking these women of color in Congress, thought that Trump had gone as low as he could go. And as Jonathan reports, a lot of White House observers and people inside the White House were shocked that actually the frantic sort of management lifestyle has become even more detached and even more dangerous. And we don't know where the bottom is. We do know that he continues to shock by the day.
You know, you use the Austin Powers rather light metaphor. With all seriousness, the Mussolini, when Mussolini's standing up there on that terrace like this, with his face like that, to me, the parallels with Trump in terms of that self-satisfaction at the chaos he's creating, the parallels are stunning there. You know what's so ironic? That coming off of, to me, pretty poor debates both nights for the Democrats, if Trump stood up and basically talked about the economy, talked about, hey, by the way, two benchmark Democratic strongholds, criminal reform and immigration. By the way, they brought up that Obama deported more people than I ever did. Oh, by the way, they were arguing about critical reform. I passed the most, comprehensive criminal prison reform act. Stronghold Democratic benchmarks that he could own. Of course, he doesn't go there. The scary thing for me, and Joe, you and I talked about this last week as him being a transactional ideologue, is he's going to keep lowering it, keep digging into that base, and then sometime around April, May next year, pivot and start acting somewhat normal. And to your whole premise of this segment, that because he's lowered it so low, that when he starts just giving a Normandy speech and starts talking about, why don't we relook at healthcare a little bit, people are going to go, wow, so there's this mad irony happening here that worries me. Everybody keeps going, oh, he's going to keep going there, he's going to keep going there. I think it's the opposite. I think he's digging, and then he's going to pivot, and then he's really going to be tough to beat.
Well, there are a lot of people concerned about that, but he has not proven himself capable of being disciplined for more than a day or two. He can give the Normandy speech, but then he will go and give an interview on Fox News with the crosses of the dead from D-Day behind him and launched the most just inflammatory, terrible political attacks against people in the United States. So he can't, he's incapable of doing that. I will say, Caddy, the thing that last night's rally showed, and it was a great, I think it was a great comparison with what the Democrats were doing. It showed that here was a guy that strutted across the stage. He was being a demagogue, I would say Mussolini-like, just picking at racial resentments constantly. And then you go like the previous two nights, and you have Democrats going, well, you know, I have looked at subsection 3 of page 487 of your Medicare for All plan, and I fear that after the third deductible, that the coverage may not be as satisfactory if you are in Medicare Zone 3 instead of Medicare Zone 1. Of course, you have to weigh that with a bookings instant. I could go on all night because the Democrats went on all night. They never, there's not a Democrat on the stage that understands how to take it to a higher level, that understands the bigger theme. And I think, Caddy, most importantly, something that Trump understood from the very beginning that they need to get, you don't have to play by the rules. If CNN or MSNBC sets up a question to say, Senator Harris, Joe Biden is a jerk, and he thinks you're a jerk, how do you respond? You know what? They don't have to play by the rules. They can go, I think Joe Biden has served this country well.
There you go.
I'm very proud of everything he's done, and I stand with Joe Biden. He stands with me. Now let's talk about the man who is changing America for the worse, Donald Trump. They don't have to take the bait, Caddy, but they always do. Yeah. And there doesn't seem to be a Democrat that understands where we are right now in history against this man.
Yeah, I was laughing because I'm so glad I got lost in that whole healthcare debate too. And at one point I was thinking, do I just not know my healthcare policy enough? And then I was thinking, if I don't understand this and we're covering this every day, then what are the voters making of this? But you're right. I mean, look, if they are going to try and go high as a party, in a sense, these debates are certainly not the best opportunity to take on Barack Obama, as you've been saying, Joe, over the last couple of days, the most popular Democrat living at the moment, not take on his healthcare plan, which has a something like 87% approval rating amongst Democrats as well. And they don't need to do that game of taking on each other. And that is why that second night in particular of the debates was so dissatisfying and why it makes the field look so weak. I mean, I struggled by the end of that 3-hour-long second debate to see Joe Biden up against Donald Trump on a debate stage. I mean, Donald Trump will change the facts, ignore the facts, reverse himself, but he'll do it with this phenomenal bluster and confidence the whole time through. And against that, if Joe Biden were the nominee and we're going to put in that performance, he's looking kind of slightly doddery and distracted and not in control of himself and not in control of the surroundings. And that's just not going to be a good look for them. The only reason Biden is ahead 19 points in the polls in that pack is because people think he can win. That belief can disappear pretty fast. And once it does, what are the Democrats left with?
Joe, you know, can I just say it one other way that you're saying it? Maybe I'll go one step further. The Democrats have become the party of nerds. I mean, that's what goes on there. The Republicans are the party of strength and reprehensible many, many times. But people follow strength, and there's a nerdiness that's happened to the Democratic Party where your voice did it perfectly, and
so
you've got it, and that's it. We've become a wimpy party, and people don't follow wimps. I know I'm going to get a lot of you're talking.
Well, no. I actually heard that last night on Chris Hayes. People were again, because I'm not watching the Red Sox anymore. So I was watching Chris Hayes. I think the Red Sox were already losing 4-2 by that time. But they were saying the same thing on Chris Hayes. Say, listen, Donald Trump is a strong leader. Democrats need a strong leader that can stand toe to toe with them. And it wasn't just Chris saying that. It was a very diverse panel. Everybody seemed to agree. And Richard Haass also agreed on something else, what we're talking about, getting down in the weeds. Jonathan Alter said, hey, stop leading with your chin. Like, don't talk about decriminalizing illegal border crossings because you're never going to get to that. Like, that's going to be like the 12th thing you get to. When you put your, comprehensive immigration reform plan together. Democrats should say, we're for comprehensive immigration reform. We think dreamers should be able to take part in that American dream. We're for universal health care. We don't know exactly how we're going to get there. We just know we're going to get there together as a party, and we're going to try to bring in independents and Republicans and everybody in. That's our goal. And stop fighting each other over these small, exaggerated differences that they think might help them get 1 or 2 percentage points from the far left Democratic base. It is a losing proposition. Focus on Trump.
I agree. This election ought to be a referendum on the fitness of Donald Trump to have 4 more years as president. What's quite remarkable, these two sets of debates have increasingly made this a referendum on the fitness of Democrats to replace him. Democrats ought to be on the offensive here, not on the defensive. And at least the first 2 sets of debates have, I think, hurt all of them rather than helped them. And you're right. To take these narrow approaches, whether it's to immigration or health care, that may appeal to elements of their base won't set them up at all. And I think there's probably a limit. You're the politician, I'm not. But there's a limit to how much you can reposition yourself after the primaries for the general election, because there's going to be an awful lot of clips showing what people said in these debates. And my sense is this is all going to come back to haunt them.
Well, and those clips are forever. And Willie, as they were saying on Chris Hayes' All In last night, you take, for instance, Julian Castro talking, bringing up this issue about the difference between him and Joe Biden on whether illegal crossing into the United States becomes decriminalized. That was such a marginal issue. It's such a small issue that actually has nothing to do with the fact that Donald Trump decided he was going to put children in cages. That, again, it's an exaggeration of an issue. It's actually creating a conflict out of thin air and then trying to beat up an opponent out of it. Again, focusing on attacking other Democrats on the stage and attacking Barack Obama instead of going against a guy who made it a focus of his policy to separate children, put them in cages, and have his attorney general say, yeah, we're doing this on purpose to discourage people from coming to America.
Well, it accomplishes 2 things at once, that neither of which I think you want accomplished if you're a Democrat running for president of the United States. One is attacking the legacy of Barack Obama. The other is giving Donald Trump a big old piece of red meat to talk about. Democrats want open borders. They don't want to prosecute people who come in illegally anymore. Probably not the way you want to go in a Democratic primary.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.